to our understanding, you're a homeowner. You bought your first home at 22.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, from our perspective as adults, that's quite phenomenal. I think most people would agree with that. It's phenomenal because it's almost unheard of, right?
Mm-hmm.
I would imagine in your mind as a younger person, it's probably like unheard of. Why should it be unheard? But it really is something for a lot of reasons is unheard of. A lot of it has to do with the fact that well, at least in our lifetimes, it's unheard of. I think before our lifetimes, from when I study history, Black people were owning real estate, you know, doing a lot of progressive things. So I don't know, like, you know, in prior to the 50s and beyond that, I'm pretty sure culturally things were moving a little different and a little more intact, even though they like like us to believe differently. But in our
Mm-hmm.
lifetimes, you know, we weren't taught anything about credit. Definitely wasn't taught about owning real estate. It seemed like it was a period of time where things in the Black community were still vibrant, but beginning to decline in a lot of ways. Drugs had a lot to do with that. Violence had a lot to do with that, especially crack. But as a result, many of us grew up just not knowing about certain things until we had to experience it. And by that point, mistakes had already been made. So now we spent more time trying to fix the past than actually manifesting in the present. So, you know, there are a lot of reasons as to why a lot of people would look at owning your first home at 22 as being phenomenal. Do you see it as such? Do you see it as something that's phenomenal?
Personally, I don't know. Maybe I don't think it's maybe because I don't think it's so far out of reach. I think it's something that people can do. It's not like an unrealistic goal that I had. It was just it's something that I had wanted to do for a long time, and I personally don't think that it's that phenomenal. Now, like, you know, it was no skill into it. Not it was no true skill to get it done. You know, I think it's
So that's the message that we want to relay. Okay, so since it feels like such a simplified experience for you, for most adults, including myself, it definitely seemed complicated. It was a lot less complicated the more familiar I became with the language, with the ideology. But going into it and going on the journey, even once I began to figure certain things out, it just seems like the complications were constant as far as having to try to figure what this means, figure what that means, how to get this in place, how to get that in place. How would you relay that from a practical perspective? What makes it simple? Like, let's break the process down for somebody that feels like it's almost impossible. Let's make it simple.
okay. It's kind of difficult for me. It's difficult to make it simple because that's all I watched on TV.
Okay.
All I watched was houses. I ain't watched, what is it, Empire, like all the news that you were talking about. I don't know none of that. I didn't surround myself with everything that most people surround themselves with. So every time I came back home for a break, the only thing you would see on TV was HGTV. I'm watching it till I go to sleep. I wake up, have it on. So I surrounded myself with it. So when the time came, it really wasn't too difficult. But I mean, honestly, it's just you have to know where you are. So I've talked to a couple people who there was this one person who they knew they had a really bad credit. They didn't have a job. It was just a lot of different things, but they were looking for a house soon. And I was just like, you just have to understand a couple basic things, like that you need to have job stability because people don't want to loan you money if you are in and out, or if you don't have a job right now. Like, what income do you have? Like, yeah, you might have some money, but you don't have a steady income. So why would I loan you this money? So you have that, and then you also have your credit. If you know your credit is bad and you have terrible spending habits, you need to work on your credit beforehand, because once you get the house, you'll easily foreclose. You'll foreclose soon. So you really have to know your spending habits. Your price point. People don't understand their price point. What can you truly afford? Like, people want to get a $250,000 house and you're not bringing in that much money. And then when bills come and you have to pay for food, you really understand, like, now I don't have much money for myself. Now, how am I going to pay for my gas? How am I going to pay for the everyday things that I might need in my life? And I think it's just really understanding those three things, maybe. I'm not sure what the fourth would have been. I think those three things are the main things that you really need to understand when going into wanting to get a house.
You said three things. I'm gonna add the fourth, which came from something that you said. I don't know if you realize you said it. You said there was a point in the beginning where that's all you watched on television.
Right.
That's a very key point, because it goes to something that I was saying, where I was like, the more familiar I became, the easier it started to seem. Once I started to understand the language and the thinking, then it started becoming more simple. So I'm going to chalk that up as the fourth one, or the first one, as to saying study. You should study and familiarize yourself. It's just like when you go in the courtroom and the lawyers and the judge, they speak in a whole nother language, and you got to have a lawyer kind of interpret things for you. Real estate is the same way. And it's something that most people don't even talk about. But when you go in, when you call a real estate agent, they're literally speaking a real estate language that's foreign to you if you have not been in that world. When you're with the people that deal with the mortgages, when you're dealing with the real estate broker, even when you're dealing with the person that's selling the house, you know what I mean? A lot of times it's a whole culture that goes with that you don't even understand unless you familiarize yourself with how people are thinking and moving.
Okay.
The next thing you said was job stability. Something else that like you said, it's something that we all should be aware of, but it's weird that it's not something that we really that's really understood. Like, if you're going to the bank to borrow money, especially in this time period, they not giving up no bread unless they feel like you can pay them back, right? We through a phase, especially in Atlanta, where banks were dealing with predatory lending, where they was just giving money out for houses. But I think even with that, they still wanted to see something that you had on paper to say you could pay this bread back, right? And even now, you can have a good job, but if it ain't a full-time job, they like, well, you need to have been there for at least 2 years or so.
Yep.
And it could be a great job, but so job stability, I think is such a basic thing, but it's something that a lot of people don't even really realize. Even if you work at a supermarket, you can position yourself to buy a home just because you working at that supermarket. I worked with, I was in a cab one time. This was when I lived in upstate New York, and the cab would have multiple people in it. And there was a Spanish dude in there. I don't know if he was Mexican or where he was from, but he was a Spanish dude, like barely spoke English, right? And this dude was talking about how he had just bought a house working at the grocery store on the military base that I was working at. And I'm like, wait, you just bought a house? You know what I'm saying? Because I'm running a business. So I'm making good money, you know what I mean? But I don't have a house. And I'm like, how you buy a house? Clearly you ain't even been in the country that long, you know what I'm saying? And how you buy a house bagging groceries? And he was like, well, for one, I just saved all my tips. Every dot, because that was the basis of the conversation. He bought a house in all ones. I forgot to add that part. Like, what? He's like, I saved all my tips. But now I understand also by having that job and having that paperwork lined up, just by having that job, you slip right into a mortgage. All you got to do is have that down payment money and a job on record. Where me owning my own business, it's a whole different gameplay. You know what I mean? It's in terms of what I got to show them. You know what I'm saying? And if I don't have certain paperwork with my business in order and my tax returns looking a certain kind of way, my business could have been making crazy money, but if it don't report on my tax returns, they not giving me that bread. You know what I'm saying? And I might have way more money than the Spanish dude, but he was in a better position than me, making way less money than I was making, but in a better position than me to buy a home because he had a stable, what was considered a stable job. Good point. Credit and spending habits. Another one that I think a lot of people neglect and a lot of people just don't know better. Once you know how the credit game is played, man, it make it so easier. So easier. You know, I had got into a car accident one time, and so I canceled all my credit cards. Like, I need as less stress as possible. Not knowing no better, when I recovered and tried to come back and reapply for my credit cards, nobody wanted to give me a credit card. And I'm like, yo, I always had good credit. What's the problem? Oh, no, we see that you canceled this card, cancel that card, cancel this card. And so now I got to wait a certain amount of years, or I got to try to finagle the system to get all that off my record. But if I had known better, I had good credit and I had mad credit cards with good limits on them. I end up messing up my credit altogether just because I canceled them joints. And now I'm in a position where I got to work to build all that back up. But it's little stuff like that that people don't understand about how to play that credit game. So definitely, that's a good point too. And price points. Can you reiterate on that about price points? You were saying know what you can afford.
Right. So what I realized going into it, you actually have to give them a number. They can either accept that number or deny you. A denial will go against your credit. So say they're going to take your debt. It's a debt to income ratio. So they're going to take your debt, like, what do you owe? So you have student loans. Okay, that's going against you. If you have a car or anything, it's going against you. What do you have to pay monthly? Like your credit card bills. If you have a bunch of credit cards, all of that, the minimum payment, it's just the minimum, actually, the minimum payment, but all of that goes against you. So that's your debt. So your debt to income ratio. So, okay, I make this much, but I also have this much debt. So leftover, I have this much. And they do the whole thing. And basically, if you're in the negative, like, okay, your mortgage is going to be, with a $200,000 house, at least 1,700, at least like 1,750 maybe. 17, no, I didn't mean to say, yeah, 1,750 a month. You probably pay 1,750 maybe. I'm not quite sure. And that's not including the bills. So now you have your bills and everything, but they don't care about that. It's really, they don't even care about whether you can afford your life. It's just that basic, no, literally, they don't care. So when you consider all of those things, now you're like, okay, well, if I had a job that pays me $50,000, can I truly afford this $200,000 house and with all the bills that it comes with, or this $250,000? You probably can afford it, but I got my car that I got to pay monthly. I have my student loans. I have a kid, you know, all the variables that people don't really consider. Now I have to pay for my kid. I have to pay for food. I have to pay for a lot in just bills in general. So people don't really consider that. And people don't have good spending habits. So they won't be able to say, okay, well, I get paid on, I might not have a job that pays me on the 1st and my bill is due on the 1st. So I don't know if I can save my money from the 20th when I got paid. I don't know if I can save all that money to the 1st because I have to spend some money every day. And I don't know if I have enough money for the 1st. And people don't really recognize that.
You mentioned student loans and debt to income ratio. That debt to income ratio thing is important. I didn't know that either until I started really doing some research and studying. What I didn't know is that if you have a student loan, even if it's in deferment, they still count that towards your debt, right? Like, and it's like a set number, like $1,000 a month or something like that.
Well, I don't know, actually.
Like, even if it's, I don't know the exact number, but I do know that even if it's in deferment, they still include that in your debt to income ratio. So in other words, if your debt exceeds, once they add up your debt and they look at your income, if your debt exceeds or comes close to exceeding your income, then that's a reason for them to deny you.
Yeah, and you can't go above a certain percent. So usually it's like once you hit 40%, you're in the iffy mode. Like people don't know if they want to I don't know if I want to give this person money.
You mean
if
you mean 40% of your income is attributed to debt?
Right.
Wow.
So once you hit 40%, they're a little skeptical. But anything like 10 to 30%, you're good. But once it continues to rise, it usually is like 30. I think it's 33 actually, 33%, 40%. You can probably get something, but it really needs to be under 33% for them to feel comfortable.
Wow. Okay, I didn't know that. That's important information. Talk to us about down payments and closing costs.
Okay. So for first-time home buyers, it's amazing. There's benefits out there for first-time home buyers. It's more so in Atlanta, actually. But usually your down payment would be 20% on certain people. It would be 20%. And if you have really, really good credit, you can probably get it for 15%. But for a first-time home buyer, you're looking at 3%. 3% down. So if it's $100,000 house, you need $3,000. But what goes along with that is you also need to at least put in a certain amount of money into the house before they will qualify you for the loan. So you at least have to put in probably I think it's $1,500 of your own money, and they make sure that it's your money. They look at they're looking at your bank receipts. Like they're looking at your movement every single time you spend some money. Anytime you get some money, they're looking at it. So if something looks skeptical, and if you're getting a gift from somebody, you can't really get gifts because they want it to be your money. If you're getting gifts from somebody, they can easily deny you. Unless you got a gift like 6 months ago, and they don't really look at that. They look at the 2 months prior. 2 months prior and the months going into it.
So for $3,000, you can get a house for $100,000.
Well, $3,000 plus all the extra stuff that you might have to, and then so it really it depends on what you can find. So I was able to find a great not even program. It wasn't intentional. The program I found wasn't intentional, but I was able to find a great program for a first-time home buyer. Since I worked in the school system, I also was able to I pay less monthly on my mortgage because right now I have a forgivable loan. My forgivable loan it knocked out. Well, how much was it? Like, I think it was
25,000.
Yeah, 25,000. I have a forgivable loan. So after 10 years of having my house, it'll be forgiven, and it will be something that I will never have to worry about. Which was awesome. And so I had that. I was able to not have to put much money in. Well, I put money into the house, but not put money down. I didn't have to put money down onto the house, but I had to put money into the house, which basically was my down payment. And then you had closing costs, and I had some closing costs that I had to worry about. And then you have appraisal fees and inspection fees. So you go into it and you pay for your inspection. Say your inspection goes good, then you move on with your whole process. But if your inspection, I've dealt with an inspection that went bad, and we moved on to the next house, and that inspection went good, and then you pay your appraisal fee, which was $14. I mean, was like $400 something, usually minimum $400.
So when you say 3% down payment, is that FHA loans?
I believe those are FHA loans. I don't know about Fannie Mae. I think I had a conventional because of my credit. My credit was good enough for me to be able to get conventional, and which was great because people actually prefer conventional. Like the buyer usually prefers a conventional, and it also has better deals. You know, I was able to get it at a percentage. The percentage in which I got it, like, what is it? 3-4%, something like that. I'm not quite sure.
You mean your interest rate?
My interest rate. Mm-hmm.
So your down payment was more around 20%?
No. No percent.
Oh, no percent.
No, zero.
How'd you manage? Was that because of the program that you came in with?
Yes, I did my research. Well, actually, this is what happened. Volunteered every year, just kind of helping out. And I was at this one school helping out another team that I had met. And then I was at a different school. So it was 3 schools there. I was just helping out one of the schools that I knew. And I was just kind of talking and helping where I could. And one of the coaches was like, hey, there's this thing called Invest Atlanta. Invest Atlanta, if you have Invest Atlanta, like she was just talking about like, yeah, I purchased the house, I sold it, and this is I just got my money and now I'm on to my next house. And she was able to make money. She had to keep it for a year. Oh no. She had to keep it for a year and then she was able to make money from it. With the program, you usually have to keep or not be able to sell it or have a renter in it for a year. And then you can make money from it. So when I saw that, I was like, oh yeah, this is amazing. I told my mother and I was like, listen, it's this thing called Invest Atlanta and we got to do some research. We ended up going to one of the home buyer classes that was mandatory. And I tried to continue my process with them. And then I ended up getting introduced by my realtor and her, the lender, to this place called, what is it?
The Atlanta
Housing Authority, AHA. So Atlanta Housing Authority. And I was able
to back up and tell them why, the reason why she wasn't able to go through Invest Atlanta, which actually would have provided her with a better situation, because through Invest Atlanta, has she been able to find a house in Atlanta in the price point that she wanted, she would have been able to have her loan
forgiven immediately.
So the immediate, like soon as you sign on the dotted line,
but listen,
it might have been given 10,000.
Yeah, it would have been 10,000
money, but 10,000 forgiven immediately, and she would have only had to once that was that immediate forgiveness, which would have been for the conventional loan. So you had to have a certain credit score, which she would have qualified for. She would have had that loan forgiven immediately and could have gone into like renter mode. Like she could have had a tenant soon as she signed on the dotted line.
Right.
But because we were not able to even find homes in the Atlanta area.
No, my house is in the Atlanta area. I'm gonna tell you. So what happened was I had a realtor and she only worked with a specific lender. And then I tried to find different lenders and then we couldn't. And for some reason there was a miscommunication. Something was skeptical about him. I had a bad feeling about the guy. And because of that, I just went with my gut. And my gut was to go with somewhere else. And that's what happened. It wasn't the fact that my house wasn't in the city limits, because my house is actually in the city limits.
I'm not saying that. You couldn't find a house in the price point. The price point that you were looking for in the area that you were looking for, which was on that belt line, you couldn't find homes cheap enough that didn't require tons of work. Remember, we were looking at homes and it was like, they were in your price point, but they required you to almost knock the house down and build it over.
Yeah, no. So that's not the case.
Okay.
Because the house, but by that point, I had moved on.
Okay.
Yeah, we were definitely trying to find.
So that's why you moved on to.
I couldn't. Yeah, it was difficult finding a house that was in my price point. It definitely was, just in Atlanta. Period. Everything was basically crumbling down and needed complete rehab, and that's not something I was able to do, and so the other lender was able to work in Cobb County, and she was giving me all of these options, so I felt more comfortable, and I just went with that, and then I ended up finding a house in Atlanta, and I could have done what I wanted to do the first time, but I was able to get forgivable after $25,000. Well, I mean $25,000 after 10 years. So, you know, I'm happy about that.
After how many years?
After 10 years of having the house, not necessarily living.
Oh, so you have to own it for 10 years?
But my thing is, I feel like the projection by 10 years, like just in the couple of months in which I've had the house, 3 houses have been built. Well, one is in the process of being built on my street. Literally, like, so, and people call like, hey, are you trying to sell a house? No. Hey, I get mail about it. I get mail about it. So it's only makes me excited because in 10 years, and then the thing is, after 5 years, the breakdown gets different. So after 5 years, it continues to decrease. So I wouldn't owe as much because you paid so much on it that, so like if I were to sell the house and I was able to make a good amount of money after 5 years, I could split it. Like, not split it, but I'd have to give them some money.
But not at the same rate. So you wouldn't owe $25,000. You would owe a decreased percentage if you did it early, because they talked about that. Some people, it's cost effective because the homes appreciate so much based on the building that it might be cost effective for some people to get out. But part of that is because she was so young, 10 years she'll be 32 and she's still young. You see what I'm saying? Now, for somebody who's a little bit older, who's getting into this, you know, and if you're 40 some years old and you're a first time home buyer, you may not want to be, you know, that might not be something, or you may want to live there and it's not a big deal. But yeah, so these are all the things you have to think about. But there are programs out there, and that's one thing. That was the biggest thing, is that prior to the young ladies talking to her, we just didn't know. I mean, and maybe that's just ignorance. We never.
No, it's actually difficult finding it unless you know what to look for. It's difficult looking it up and saying, like, how do you buy a house? They'll be like, okay, you need to put 20% down or this, and you have an FHA. But you don't know the programs that are out there for you.
But you can't research first-time home buyer programs and Google it?
You might be able to. I mean, but my thing is, your thought process is not necessarily to look up first-time home buyer programs.
They're not going to tell you about first-time home buyer programs.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So the first program that you mentioned was Invest Atlanta.
Mm-hmm.
Then the next program came through Atlanta Housing Authority.
Mm-hmm.
So let me give you a scenario.
Mm-hmm.
I'm ready to relocate to Atlanta or the surrounding area, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm coming from an apartment.
Okay.
I have a job, but obviously if I'm planning to relocate, then I have the dilemma of whether or not I got to find a job in Atlanta or how that's going to work.
Okay.
But my desire is to relocate as soon as possible. Let's say I have 20,000 in the bank.
Okay. No.
Take me through the steps, what I need to do.
You can't use the program. You can't have over a certain amount in the bank. So it's really for people who need it. For those individuals who need it. If you have $20,000 in the bank, you can do a down payment on something. But it's for those individuals. So at least Invest Atlanta are for those individuals who want to purchase houses, who want just want a house. They don't have really many options, and they're trying to build Atlanta up. So it's not so many vacant houses. It was a lot of vacant houses, and so it's not that many vacant houses. They had the program put in place, especially when you have the Beltline project going on. And the Beltline project is an amazing project, and it's the houses around that area and areas and that were just poverty and houses were just looking crazy. Those houses are worth so much. We'll walk on the Beltline. I'll look over. It'll be a smaller house that doesn't look the best. I bet you that house is $200,000 plus. And those are like $200,000 to $250,000 houses. People are excited to get those houses because that part of the Beltline is not even finished. So they have put this whole thing together because of what is coming to Atlanta and what they want of Atlanta. Instead of it being poverty and being a place.
Gentrification, and they're sprinkling in people. You know how they do. They sprinkle in people and have programs for people who need,
and that's what
help. But it's still not going to be the majority of people. But right now, you cannot have that much money in your bank account.
Nope. You can't have 20.
You got to move some money.
Yeah, you have to move some money. Move some money a couple of months beforehand.
Right.
Otherwise,
you have to plan, because when we were sitting there, people were asking, like they were even saying, if you get a raise, because they have, I used to have paperwork too from Invest Atlanta, but I ended up throwing it away because I gave it to somebody and then I had an extra one. But I'm telling you, they had
price points. If you made this much, you could get money. And if you made this much, you could get, but if you made more than this, you can't get nothing. So
people were like asking questions. So if I get a raise and the raise takes me, they were like, nope.
And
it's the same with the housing authority too. Those.
So no, I don't think so.
No, it's not as much. And they didn't really go too deep into all of that. It was no, you got to do this and you got to do that, and we're gonna tell you. I think it's really just a place where you can get assistance. I think that's really what it is.
Yeah. Okay. And that goes out in different counties. So it is not isolated to Atlanta.
All right. So let's go that route. So let's say, all right, step one is to contact the housing authority. In this case, I can skip the moving the money around part because they're not interested in that. So I can have the $20,000 in the bank and then not even come up as an issue with the housing authority. All right. So let's go that route. So I contact the housing authority and say, hey, I'm interested in relocating to Atlanta, and they'll just take it from there.
And so what I'm thinking is the only thing they may be able to hold against you is that you don't live in the city of Atlanta. Well, that you don't live in Atlanta at that point. Like, so for them, they were big on investments. They didn't necessarily want somebody to get in there, flip it and then leave, or to get in there and have it as an Airbnb. And that was the one thing while I was signing my papers, she was just like, and you just have to agree to not have it as an Airbnb. Like, we really don't want that. We don't want our communities filled with Airbnbs. And she was very adamant. She was just like, this is our one thing. And I was like, that's fine. I wasn't trying to do that anyways.
Okay, so that was it. So with that said, I contact them.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the dilemma that I gave you, and the example is, my job is here, but I'm relocating there. Going off of everything that I'm hearing you say, it probably would be ideal for me to figure that out as far as transferring my job or having something set up.
Right.
I can go into their situation with. That's up as an issue, right?
Right.
Imagine when it comes time to checking your credit and all of that kind of stuff.
Hey, yeah, and Kayla was only in her job for how long? 6 months?
When I started in September technically, even though I was working in August. I started in September technically. No, when I might have hit that mark right before closing. But while that process, it was like 3-4 months.
So you had only been working full time for about 3 or 4 months.
It was 4 months. But what happened was, due to the fact that I was in school prior to, that gave me years, quote unquote. Now, if there was a bigger gap in the time frame in which I got a job, that wouldn't have qualified as my years.
That's a good.
They allowed her to use her at her school time as, okay, so she's been doing something consistently. She was been in school, she got a job, so they've used that.
Right.
That's a good point. So, so Mill, do you have any questions on this subject matter that you want to?
I have one question. It's for Kayla. You know, I would just ask you, like, being as young as you are and everything, what are some of the benefits you see from being a homeowner?
Honestly, it's being a homeowner versus being in an apartment. So I was in an apartment my senior year, and it's just all the rules that you don't really have to deal with, like the question of, you know, I don't know. It's just all on you. Personally, you don't have to deal with parking. You don't have to deal with all of that goofy stuff. And I'm so excited. I'm happy about that. Now, like, you know, apartments, you can have a pool. You have the luxury of this, that, and the other. But I can pull into the driveway, walk into the house, and I'm good. And it just gives you a level of comfort versus, you know, you walk up, you have to deal with all these random people when you just trying to get into the house. You don't know if you're gonna be on the third floor. If it's an outside one, you gotta walk up the steps, keep walking up the steps. It might have been raining. It's just a lot to it. And it's just like, I don't have to deal with any of that. I have a yard where I have space for people to come over. I don't have to deal with noise complaints or people above me doing something or people below me or a shootout that is meant for, it's just all those things, that those variables that you don't really have to deal with when having something of your own, unless you bring that to you. But
right.
So,
well,
yeah.
I think what you're doing is dope. You know, I think you are an inspiration to not only myself, but, you know, your generation on the whole. Because you really got it together and you're really making some positive strides. And, you know, kudos to your mom, you know, and your dad for, you know, helping you out with that, man. It's just, it's actually shifted my thinking about how I want to deal with my daughter and how I want to set her up. You know what I mean? So I think this was awesome.
Kayla, can you talk about some of the things to think about, though? Once you are in the home, some things that you have to be aware of.
Okay, so yeah, depending on the type of house that you get, if it's an older house like the one I got, you're gonna have problems, okay? And those problems occur on a monthly basis. So that's a bill in itself. So oh Lord, older pipes, it's a lot of different things, a lot of different variables. As long as, and it goes back to spending habits, as long as your spending habits aren't terrible, you might have some money or some assistance with certain things, you'll be fine. It's just it's just so much though. It's so many things. And I think that's why I was glad that this is happening now. Like, I can see, like, at first it was going to be, I wanted a renter in there immediately, but I wouldn't have understood everything that I'm understanding now. Being able to be in the house and know when we first got there, they put AC in, but someone accidentally didn't correctly put in one little screw, one little, whatever the little nut is. And when we got in the house, it was cold, but we thought, like, okay, that's the AC pumping. It made the noise and everything. It's pumping. And once it started getting hot here, it was a wrap. Sweating bullets. We had fans all throughout the house. Realized, like, oh, now it's a big AC issue. Like, yeah, I have the AC unit. I have this, but I didn't know. I had no what is Freon, right? Mm-hmm. So it was just so many situations that occurred, and then you want to fix certain things up. So I spent money on fixing the bathroom up, the kitchen up, just to, have a different, it was kind of older in both of those areas. Like, I barely had a lot of countertop space. So then, boom. I was just like, I rearranged the whole kitchen. Then next thing you know, you have to pay for, what happened? It's just, it's been a lot of things that have happened.
Trees are falling, 2 trees.
2 trees. One tree fell in my neighbor's yard on the left-hand side the first time, but it wasn't a dead tree. And then the next tree happened like 3 months later, fell into my other neighbor's yard. It's a lot. It's a lot that can happen. I don't know how many things have happened in this short period of time. But you know, it's a lot. It's a lot of expenses, and you realize how many expenses come with having a house, and they're on you. It's not on the apartment complex to fix your water. Oh, it's not on the apartment complex it's on you. So it's definitely a lot of lessons learned, and I'm learning a lot from this whole process, and I'm happy about it, honestly, that I'm able to learn this before I get that renter in there in March. Yeah.
See, that's the thing, and that's one thing to keep in mind is that for young people who are venturing out, it's one thing to get the house, but there's another thing
Keep it.
to be able to keep the house up, to do the things that need to be done. And those are the lessons that people can't take that lightly, because home ownership comes with a lot of responsibilities. And like Kayla said, if you're getting an older home, and that's not necessarily, everybody didn't have to get a home as old as hers, but for the location she was trying to get in, she had to get an older home because that's the price point she needed to be in. But older homes come with a lot of maintenance. And things go up, and that's part of it. And if you're not in a position to either have a savings where you can do it or have someone who can help you out at times with certain things,
there you go.
It's going to be a problem. So you got to keep those things in mind. So I would say for all of these young people who are just out here and it's just them and they don't have no support networks and they don't have any real savings.
And that's where knowing your price point comes in handy. If you know what you can truly afford, and see, that's what I realized when I saw my first water bill. I'm not hearing my parents saying like, yeah, we paid every 2 months or 3 months, and we only pay this much for the whole family. And I was like, I got my water bill. It was $200 for my small house. $200 every month. Every month. When I tell you, it hurt my heart. And then what was a power bill that was $175? I'm like, I'm paying almost $400 on just those 2 bills. And I'm like, I have so many other bills to consider. So all of those things, all those variables just kind of stress you out a little bit, like, especially if you go into it thinking like, okay, here's the average water bill. Here's the average power bill. And then you get yours for So those are definitely variables that I didn't realize. I'm thinking I at least have $200 extra in my pocket. I thought I was gonna have $200 extra in my pocket every month.
Right.
Those 2 bills hit.
So is it safe to say that if you're going to enter that venture, that you got to do some serious planning?
Yes.
Yes.
And need a good support system.
Yeah.
Yes.
That really is it. Nita, you have to, because there's so many things that just can come up. And I mean, that's just the reality of it. So yes, it's one thing to get into it, but it's another thing to keep it up. So, and then you have to factor in homeowners insurance, and you know, it's just, it's a lot. It's not something that you should go into lightly. And even though she worked hard to get into the house, a lot of work has been put into the maintenance and keeping it. Yeah.
It's a lot. It's definitely a lot.
Think about building that equity so you get that rent and you get your money back. You can start getting return on some of that.
I'm already trying to get a HELOC. I'm trying to get my HELOC. I already tried to start the process. I'm gonna call them tomorrow to see where it is, because I said if I could get this before this potential crash, I'd be happy that I can listen. If I have some money guaranteed before this crash, I'd be excited.
There you go.
Excited.
Kudos to you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.